So, let's be honest. Every bit of media analysis and discussion you have heard around FIFA's decision to expand the World Cup from 32 nations to 48 has been negative, labelling the move as money hungry and diluting the quality of football's most pristine competition. Much of this criticism is fair. However, I do think much of the coverage lacks nuance, with many of the popular critiques being overplayed. Nonetheless, FIFA's proposed format for the expanded World Cup has the potential to ruin the competition if they don't act, with my proposed solution having the capacity to maintain the competition, jeopardy and joy the World Cup is loved for, whilst boosting the much wanted revenue for the game's governing body. They announced the decision to expand the World Cup from 32 to 48 teams for the 2026 World Cup in 2017, parroting the notion that they were doing this to give more countries an opportunity to qualify for the World Cup and to expand the game around the world. This is true. Over the past 30 years, FIFA recognised nations have risen from 147 to 211, with there actually being a lower share of nations at the 32-team Qatar World Cup than the final version of the 24-team World Cup back in 1994. Although this is obviously not the reason why FIFA, a notoriously shady organisation, is expanding the World Cup. They made the decision so that they could make even more money out of the world's biggest sporting event, with there being no doubt in my mind that if an 8-nation World Cup made them the most money, that would be the format they went for. However, just because a shady organisation made a decision for selfish purposes, it doesn't inherently mean it's a bad decision. With the expansions from 16 countries to 24, and from 24 to 32 in 1982 and 1998 respectively, being heavily criticised at the time, facing the same accusations of diluting the quality. However, in hindsight, most people would say the World Cup is better off for having 32 nations in it. Seeing a wide range of cultures in a single event is what makes the World Cup so special when comparing it to other continental tournaments like the Euros and Copa America. However, the expansion does have clear issues. Firstly, for host nations, the additional 16 teams increases the already astronomical financial burden of hosting a World Cup, with it being a black hole for taxpayers' money to spend the billions to host the tournament. The expansion will require at least 2 more FIFA-recognised stadiums, as well as training facilities for 48 teams, and accommodation for the increased travelling fans, staff and media. These requirements make it practically impossible for a single nation to host a World Cup again, outside of oil-producing sports-washing projects where there is no financial pressures to consider. This is already evident at the next 2 World Cups, in the USA, Canada and Mexico, as well as Spain, Portugal and Morocco, with any consideration of the fan experience and affordability being completely ignored. But for most fans around the world, the most tangible negative impact of the 48-team World Cup will be the current proposed format. I'd highly recommend watching Alfie's from HITC7's video detailing the flawed nature of FIFA's proposed format, but I'll briefly explain it now. With the 48 teams being split into 12 groups of 4, where the top 2 teams from each group, in addition to 8 best third place finishers qualifying for a new round of 32 stage. For me, the group stage of a World Cup is the most entertaining and enjoyable football can get. Cultures clash in games of great importance and jeopardy, with the last game of the group where all teams play simultaneously, fighting it out for those top 2 spots, being perfect entertainment. Exemplified by Group E in Qatar, where all 4 nations spent periods of the final game in a qualification position and in the bottom 2 places, before finally finishing with Japan and Spain qualifying, with Costa Rica and Giants Germany bowing out at the first stage. If this was 2026, Germany would have qualified as a 3rd place team, and Spain would have practically already qualified after the first game when they beat Costa Rica 7-0, with the similar Euros format never having a team finish with 3 points and a positive goal difference fail to get out the group. So in a World Cup with 48 teams where there is sure to be some whipping boys, one dominant win will likely be enough to qualify, with there being practically no jeopardy for most decent teams. In addition to that, making a knockout stage comprised of 32 teams takes away any sense of achievement the smaller nations would have previously held for getting through the group, with the knockout stage draw most likely being much more down to luck than the formulaic first in group plays second in group structure that rewarded top place finishers in a group to not play another top finisher until the quarterfinals at the earliest. with there likely being two giants who top their groups and win their round of 32, facing each other in the round of 16 in the proposed format, once again taking away the jeopardy of topping your group. However, the notion of expanding the World Cup will damage the integrity of the competition is nonsense. Firstly, the idea that the World Cup is the top level of football has been out of date for over half a century. All the world's top players and coaches are situated in the European game, where teams spend day in and day out training, working on patterns of play and automations that are just not possible in international football. There is no coincidence that Bournemouth have a more talented coach than both the French and English national teams. The density of talent has also spread away from just the South American and European giants over the past 20 years, showcased at the last World Cup, where Morocco and Croatia made the semi-finals, and the USA, Australia, Senegal, Japan and Korea made the knockout stages. Not to mention Saudi Arabia's shock opening day win over eventual champions Argentina. The depth of talented national teams is deeper than ever, and the additional 16 teams won't damage the competition, and will in fact, in my opinion, increase the cultural and football diversity of the tournament. Firstly, Europe, the deepest and highest quality confederation of them all, will see their entrance rise from 13 to 16. At the last World Cup, European champions Italy, in addition to the likes of Sweden, Scotland and Norway, failed to qualify. And that's why these three new entrants won't see the competition's quality dive at all. CONMEBOL, the South American Confederation, will see their entrance rise from 4 in 2022 to 6 in 2026. Nations who have reached the knockout stages of World Cups in recent years, like Colombia and Chile, failed to qualify in 2022, and even the likes of Peru and Paraguay would be far from pushovers if they were to qualify. But you might tell me that these are just the two strongest continents, and the other 11 spaces will destroy the tournament's quality. But let's go to Africa, where, despite only two nations qualifying for the knockout stages at 2022 World Cup, Cameroon beat Brazil, Tunisia beat France, and Ghana played some of the most entertaining games of the tournament. No African nation has ever been seen as a pushover at a World Cup, and the Confederation is by far the most even of all six, highlighted at the most recent AFCON, where none of the 5 nations who qualified for the World Cup reaching the quarter-finals of the tournament. So Africa, the biggest winners of the expansion, upgrading from 5 nations to 9, will only bring more fun and competitive teams to the competition, all of which will have the capacity to make deep runs in the competition. To put it into context, Ghana is currently the 14th highest ranked national team in Africa, and they almost got out of a group containing Uruguay and Portugal just 2 years ago. So that's where 9 of the 16 new teams will come from. Oceania will have a guaranteed place at the World Cup for the first time, which despite not having any top nations makes sense, as it was unjust that one of the 6 confederations wasn't represented at the World Cup. With the last time New Zealand qualified for the World Cup back in 2010, they were the only nation not to lose a match during the whole tournament, drawing all 3 of their group games. The drop of quality will most likely come from the Asian and CONCACAF regions, both getting 2 more spots at the World Cup. However, as shown at the last World Cup, Asia is the fastest growing source of talent in the world, with the vast size of the continent posing large growth potential over the next 2 decades, with Middle Eastern investment in addition to increased European exposure, likely seeing Asian football continue to rise. Jordan reached the final of an Asian Cup, and Uzbekistan drew 3-3 with Mexico in the past 12 months, highlighting the potential for these new Asian competitors not to be total pushovers and will bring new cultures and traditions to the World Cup. Similarly, the likely return of Jamaica to the World Cup will bring Caribbean representation back to the World Cup for the first time in 20 years, bringing a team who, despite being one of the weakest teams in the tournament, still having players in the world's top leagues, something that almost no nations outside of Europe and South America could claim only 40 years ago. The final 2 places at the World Cup will be made up of intercontinental playoff winners in a tournament in the USA. The competitors will be made up of 1 nation from Africa, South America, Asia, Oceania, and 2 from CONCACAF, setting the stage for an interesting competition before the World Cup even begins. The expanded World Cup will see the World Cup feel less dominated by European nations, with their share dropping from 41 to 33% of teams, providing the platform for more football cultures to be spotlighted and more fun matches to take place. However, a better format will allow these nations to compete in matches of more jeopardy and ensure that the top nations feel pressure to perform from the beginning of the tournament, ensuring the group stages maintain its position at the pinnacle of sports entertainment. And I think that's what I can propose. In my opinion, the perfect tournament structure has been showcased in both the World Cup and Champions League for years now. 8 groups where the top 2 finish qualify for a round of 16, creating jeopardy to qualify and a perfect length tournament knockout stage, so it's an achievement to reach the stage, yet still a long way to go to the final. So in my opinion, although it will create some problems, they should maintain the 8 group tournament where the top 2 teams qualify. This would mean groups of 6 rather than 4, meaning finalists would have to play one more game than the current proposition, but it would increase the jeopardy massively of the group stages with 6 teams competing for just 2 spots rather than 4 for most likely 3, allowing travelling fans to have more guaranteed games they can attend and increase the money FIFA can make, as the number of games would increase from 104 to 136, and having 5 games minimum for each country could be massive from a revenue perspective, especially if massive market potential nations like India and China qualify. In practice, this will see only 33% of nations qualify for the knockout stage rather than currently proposed 66%, making it a massive achievement to qualify and making it certain some big nations will fail at the first hurdle. Based on the current FIFA rankings, these would be the countries who qualify for the World Cup, and how they would be split into 6 seeding pots, with the 3 host nations being put in pot 1 and 2 playoff winners in pot 6 based on FIFA's precedent. Under draw restrictions of a maximum of 2 nations in a group from each confederation, this was a random draw I got. Each group has some tantalising games, but Group F is an absolute standout, group of death, with 3 of the previous 4 World Cup champions in addition to African champions and 2 other nations who had been Confederation champions in the past decade. The amount of jeopardy and entertainment you would get watching these groups from the first game to the last would be intense, with all nations knowing that a bad day at the office could be fateful. Even the weakest group on paper, Group G, which has Canada as the worst pot 1 side and Colombia as a weaker pot 2 one, looks like a really interesting and entertaining group, where every team in the group would think they have a good chance to qualify. I can imagine sitting down and watching a group game between Canada and South Africa, backed up by Colombia vs Hungary, and being extremely excited as all 4 teams push hard for those prized top 2 spots. I did another 2 random draws and predicted each of the 24 groups, and only on one occasion did I have both top 2 teams qualify before the final round of fixtures, maintaining the much loved final round of fixtures of such intense jeopardy. In terms of stadia, nothing would need to change from the current proposals, as the group stage would still consist of 48 teams, with the length of the group stage just extending in time. The removal of the round of 32 would save some time, however this is still where the main issue with my proposed format arises. The European Club Association have already revealed their disapproval of the expanded World Cup on multiple occasions, and player associations around Europe have been fairly complaining about the ever-growing football calendar for a while now. Following the founding of the Nations League in 2018 and the upcoming expansion of the Champions League and Club World Cup, player welfare is being ignored more than ever, and my idea to increase the World Cup by another week and adding another game for finalists seems to be perpetuating this problem. However, I feel a compromise is required from both perspective of FIFA, the clubs and the players, to provide a better entertainment product for the World Cup. From the 21st of September 2026 to the 6th of October, there is scheduled to be a 2-week, 4-match international break in which most international footballers will play more games than they will during the World Cup. For clubs, fans and broadcasters, this 2-week break, a month into the new club season, is pain-inducing and boring. For me, this is where a compromise has to be made by FIFA in order to introduce a much more entertaining World Cup format, reducing this international break to the ordinary 1-week, 2-match window, allowing leagues to push back the start of their season by a week and ensuring players get their required rest during the off-season. removing a few friendlies from the schedule in favour of 32 more World Cup matches with a more entertaining and high-stakes group stage is beneficial for all relevant stakeholders and could create the conditions for one of the most entertaining World Cups ever. Will it happen? Probably not.